Today, we're talking about one of the most audacious, most ambitious projects in the entire history of science, a quest to prove once and for all that all of mathematics is built on a foundation of pure, solid, unshakable rock. This is the story of Hilbert's program. So let's just start with the central question, the one that kept some of the greatest minds of the 20th century up at night. You and I, we tend to think of math as, well, as perfect, right? It's the one thing that's always true. But what if it wasn't? What if the entire magnificent structure of mathematics had a crack in its very foundation? And to really get why this was such a big deal, we've got to go back in time, to the early 20th century, when mathematics was facing a full-blown crisis of confidence. Mathematicians had been creating these incredibly powerful new ideas, but one of them in particular was starting to cause some serious problems. And that idea was infinity. Yeah, the problem was this concept called the actual infinite. It's the idea of treating infinity not just as a process that goes on forever, but as a real, finished thing you can hold and work with. And while that was powerful, it was also leading to some really bizarre paradoxes, results that seemed to completely contradict logic. It got so bad that mathematicians started to doubt their own reasoning. The solid ground they thought they were standing on, well, it started to feel like quicksand. And that is where David Hilbert comes in. Hilbert was one of the absolute giants of mathematics, and he was having none of this uncertainty. He famously said he would not be driven from the paradise that modern math had created. So he laid out this incredibly bold and ambitious plan to fix the foundations, to bolt everything down, and to bring absolute certainty back to mathematics for good. So how in the world was he going to pull this off? Well, the best way to think about it is with an analogy. Picture all of modern mathematics as this colossal, gleaming skyscraper reaching into the clouds. Hilbert's plan was to prove, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that this entire skyscraper was structurally sound. But, and this is the crucial part, he insisted that the inspection could only be done using the simplest, most basic, most trustworthy hand tools you can imagine. This really breaks it down perfectly. The skyscraper, that's everything. All of classical mathematics, including all those fancy, complicated, and maybe even dangerous ideas about infinity. And the hand tools? Well, those are what Hilbert called finitary methods. We're talking about simple, concrete logic that nobody could argue with, things as basic as counting pebbles on a table. The plan was to use these dead simple tools to certify the safety of the entire incredibly complex skyscraper. So the program really boiled down to two huge goals. First, he wanted to show that these ideal objects, like infinity, were basically just convenient fictions, helpful shortcuts that you could always get rid of in the end. And second, he wanted to use those simple finitary methods to prove that mathematics would never lead to a contradiction, like proving that 2 + 2 = 5. He wanted an ironclad guarantee of consistency. The philosophy driving this whole thing, the reason for using only hand tools, is called finitism. It's basically the belief that for a proof to be truly 100% certain, it should only deal with things you can actually build or check in a finite number of steps. You can't use any magical, infinitely powerful tools to inspect the skyscraper, even if the skyscraper itself seems to touch the infinite. No tricks, no weirdness, just concrete certainty. For years, Hilbert and his students worked like crazy on this program. They were inventing whole new fields of logic to make it happen, and it really looked like they were on the verge of success. It seemed like absolute certainty was within their grasp. And then, a shockwave hit the mathematical world, and it came from a quiet, brilliant young logician named Kurt Gödel. You can see how the story was building up. Through the late teens and into the 1920s, Hilbert's team was building the machinery, things like proof theory and the epsilon calculus, all designed to make this grand plan a reality. The program was officially published, everything was moving forward. And then, 1931, a foundational shock. This is the year, 1931. The year that changed everything. A 25-year-old kid, basically, named Kurt Gödel, publishes a paper that would completely and forever change how we think about what mathematics can and cannot do. This single sentence, right here, is the core of Gödel's second incompleteness theorem, and it was absolutely devastating to Hilbert's plan. What it says, in plain English, is that any system of math that's complex enough to include basic arithmetic, adding and multiplying, can never, ever prove that it's free of contradictions using only its own rules. It's fundamentally impossible. So let's go back to our skyscraper. What Gödel proved, essentially, is that for any skyscraper tall enough to be interesting, The simple hand tools you're allowed to use, those finitary methods, are just too short. They can't reach the top floors to give the final certification. To prove the building is sound, you need to bring in a crane from the outside. You need a method that is stronger than the system itself. You just can't do it from the inside. Now, you'd think that would be the end of the story, right? A total knockout blow to Hilbert's dream of absolute certainty. But here's where things get really interesting. It didn't kill the program. Not at all. It forced the program to change, to evolve into something new and, in many ways, something even more powerful. The implication was crystal clear. If your simple hand tools aren't up to the job, you need to find bigger, more powerful tools. The goal shifted. That dream of an absolute proof from within was gone, sure. But maybe, just maybe, you could find the next best thing. A proof using tools that were a bit more complex, but that everyone could still agree were reliable and constructive. And you can see that evolution right here. You start with the original, pure program, then you hit the brick wall of Gödel's theorem. But then, a mathematician named Gerhard Gentzen does something amazing. He actually proves the consistency of arithmetic, something Gödel said couldn't be done from within. But to do it, he had to use a stronger tool called transfinite induction. This led to what's called the relativized program. The game was no longer about one final proof, but about finding the right set of stronger tools to certify any given mathematical theory. So, did Hilbert fail? He never achieved that ultimate dream of absolute certainty. But to call his program a failure? No way, not even close. Its legacy has been absolutely profound, and it shapes our world right now, today. Honestly, the single biggest legacy of Hilbert's program was the creation of a whole new branch of math, proof theory. See, in order to check the skyscraper, Hilbert's team had to invent tools to analyze the blueprints themselves. They started treating mathematical proofs not just as arguments, but as formal, concrete objects that you could study and analyze. And this is foundational to all of modern computer science. It influences everything from how we design programming languages to how we create AI that can check for bugs in software. All right, so let's quickly recap the whole wild story. Hilbert launched this epic quest for absolute mathematical certainty. Gödel came along and showed that, in the way Hilbert imagined, it was impossible. But that spectacular failure was one of the most fruitful failures in history, giving birth to the incredibly important field of proof theory and completely changing how we think about what a mathematical proof even is. And that leaves us with this huge, kind of mind-bending question. This whole quest for certainty ended up revealing the limits of certainty itself. So if we can't have that absolute bedrock proof for our most important mathematical systems, what are we actually standing on? What does it really mean for something in math to be true? That's a question mathematicians and philosophers are still wrestling with today. Thanks for joining me on this one.